All right, we are live, gents, for another episode of Rekt Radio here. We are here with OSF with a strong-looking moustache. It looks like today. Looks like he's had a bit of a day, and we're joined by Smokey The Bera from Berachain. Great to have you, man. We'll get you in a sec. OSF, do you maybe want to shout out today's sponsor, and we'll have a look through the trades as well.
Yeah, hey guys, as you know, Rekt Radio is powered by dYdX, DeFi's pro trading platform. They have just launched the Trump prediction market. It's a leveraged perpetual market where you can use advanced order types and strategies to speculate on Trump's election outcome on the 5th of November. By trading, you're tapping into a fully decentralized, community-governed protocol. Remember, that's distributed over $20 million in trading rewards this year. So you can trade now. Head over to go.dYdX.zone/WTYVII. But this show is streamed on YouTube, so you'll get the link there as well.
So yeah, it's by Trump, it looks like. And that's the election odds. I think that won if he wins. So 6% chance of Trump, it looks like, at the moment. That's gone up quite a lot, right? Look at, yeah, wow, 53 at the start of this just a few days ago. It's definitely gone up high. And then our trades are in the money, but not doing amazing.
I've got a question for you guys on this Trump stuff. There's obviously like a massive differential between betting markets, prediction markets, and polls and analysis. Is that just because like degens are just fucking betting on Trump without really like knowing any other information, like trying to gun up their crypto positions?
So there was I read an article in the FT actually this week, which was like betting on the election. Obviously, it increases massively towards the election, right? Because people don't want to lock up their money for like 3 months before the outcome, right? But they might do it like 2 or 3 weeks beforehand. So maybe it's like a lot of money coming in, and most of that's going towards Trump. It does feel like it's definitely closer in the polls, but I think even Nate Silver has him ahead now. So I think it's a bit of both.
I've been pretty checked out politically, to be honest, but it feels like there's been a bit of a vibe shift more recently, right? Feels a little more like, Patriots in control, if you will. So it seems like there's definitely more Trump energy in the timeline. I also do tend to think, at least from what I can see right now, right, when you look at just natural biases and the overlap between people who engage in crypto on a regular basis and Trump supporters versus Kamala supporters at the moment, you'd have to imagine that there's probably a few more that are Trump leaning. So I wouldn't be surprised if that makes itself known in the charts as well. So I'm sure the data set's a little bit fucked, but it directionally feels correct to me.
Yeah, for sure. I think the majority of bets are being made for Trump within crypto, right? You got to assume that that's the case. Although I guess crypto people are just trying to make money at the end of the day, like at the same time.
I just feel like you can gun up those prediction markets with not much capital. So let's say you're long like 50 mil Bitcoin, and it costs you a few $100K to gun up the prediction markets. Then Bitcoin rallies, and then you just like make money on that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like just manipulate it.
The books are so thin too, right? Like if you've got non-trivial size, then you can just bully the fuck out of people over there. And I have a couple of friends that used to do that on polymarket quite successfully. So I think that these are all best taken with like a pretty hefty grain of salt.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, they're kind of fun to fuck around with.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. Maybe a few months ago, it does feel like the volume going through this stuff is pretty wild now. Like on the dYdX, you're seeing millions of volume go through. It's like it's millions and millions of volume. I don't know. I feel like it's much more difficult now than it would be later. Like if you look at the order book, even on polymarket, you have to get through tens of millions to start moving it meaningfully. So maybe people have, I guess, you never count out how much money people have, but I do think it's more difficult than you would think.
Yeah, no, I don't think you can, slug people around on polymarket the same way as you could have a few months ago. But I think dYdX, you can probably fuck around and see what happens pretty easily. But polymarket definitely got enough of a wave to to live through that and have a little bit more anti-fragility. And I think that will be more telling, I suppose, or more interesting is to see what happens like in December, right? Does it turn back to just like, someone throwing their shoulders in the charts there, or does it turn into something a little bit more egalitarian? I definitely have opinions there.
Yeah. So maybe let's get into what you've been up to. Let's leave politics for a little bit. Smokey the Bera is a bit of an infamous figure, it feels like, on the timeline. And has got this like, maybe it's the only thing has got a proper cult behind it. It feels like if you're talking about meme coin cults, Berachain feels like a chain cult. Maybe you take us a little into this, because I feel like it's going to be one of the trades or one of the most interesting things that's going to happen over the next 6 months on a big scale. So yeah, take us through what is Berachain, how did it all begin?
Yeah, for sure, man. Fingers crossed. I think we're lucky to have the people behind us, so we do, from many different perspectives. I guess to give you like the zoomed down version, Berachain happened very much by accident, and I think that's kind of what has led to it, feeling the way it does right now. In that, as much as I wish I could claim that this was some super engineered plan, and it's like, yes, we thought there was going to be bears, and there's going to be a dude in a bear mask, and there's going to be some venture capitalists. It was very far from this. My co-founder Papa and I were fucking around in I guess DeFi summer 2.0, if you will, if you want to call it that, like mid 21. We were starting to see NFTs make it a little bit farther than your average, monkey profile picture, if you will, and get a little bit deeper into like, things that nowadays I think are just more fascinating, right? So this is, I guess, at the intersection of times where both parallel TCG was getting off the ground and Olympus DAO and like Curve and the Frax and Alchemix ecosystems were just like churning at top speed. And I think what that led to was some pretty hilarious interactions in which, on one hand, we were spending lots of times in these like DeFi native discords and talking about everything around liquidity and yield farming and just ways that one can make, I think, liquidity more interesting. But at the same time, seeing like this NFT craze and this like less scammy NFT craze get off the ground. So for us, entirely for shits and gigs, we said, hey, let's make an NFT project of a bunch of bears smoking weed. Now, like there's no magic to that genesis either, in that we just simply thought the concept was funny. Papa wanted to call it the baked bear, bong bears. I wanted to call it the baked bears, and then eventually we were just like, bong bears sounds way funnier, so let's just roll with that. Neither of us smoke either, which is like kind of the funniest part of this too. So it was like kind of a LARP in that sense. Like both have in the past, but like it's not like we're a couple of giga stoners who are like, yes, we need to make a stoner NFT collection. But we simply thought this was entertaining, and we raffled them off in a bunch of like these like very DeFi native servers, so think like Olympus and Frax and like Yurt and Curve, etc. And ended up with like a community of at start just 100 people or even less, because some people bought multiples, like 80, 90 people. That were simultaneously like left curve and right curve enough to be like, okay, cool, these guys have been around some of the right places, they've been in some good trades, like maybe they know what they're talking about, and also like left curve enough to be like, it's a JPEG of a bear with a bong, I'm going to buy this and see what happens. And from there we just sort of let things evolve a little bit more naturally, and thought, what if we found ways to make this a little bit more interesting, and make this more than just a collection of 100 bears. And we decided to make those bears rebase. Definitely not, 16,000% or phone number APYs like the good old days. But I think a similar thought towards distribution, in which folks who bought one of the initial collections would be able to receive, a collection after that, etc. So effectively, those who ended up holding these bears over time ended up receiving more and more bears as we put out different collections that had different themes. So there's one that was James Bond themed called the Bond Bears. There's one that was Halloween themed called the Boo Bears. There's one that was Christmas themed called the Baby Bears, Band Bears, blah, blah, blah. And sort of by accident, partially by design, partially by accident, we ended up, bootstrapping a community of a couple thousand folks that were, on one hand, like pretty funny and pretty, meaningfully degen and risk on, but also had an eye for, I guess, like, interesting new liquidity mechanics. And we did something that I think hasn't happened as much as I'd love to have seen it in the L1 or in the chain design spaces, which was we talked to the users and we talked to the developers, and we're like, hey, like, what do you guys want to see done here? Like, we can just be a funky NFT project, or maybe we can try to like build something a little bit more interesting. For context, myself and Papa had, known each other for the better part of a decade now. We basically built our first company side by side. We were both in the healthcare space. I was in pharmaceuticals and drug discovery. He was in medical devices. We both have engineering backgrounds, then worked in VC together for years. So we've always been guys who just like to try to build cool shit, whether that is on the operator side or helping to fund cool shit. And I think we saw an opportunity for that here. And as we talk to more and more devs and users, I think it sort of outlined something that was very clear to us intuitively, but I think less explicitly, which is like in standard proof of stake chains, there's definitely some weird trade-offs being made when it comes to incentives between liquidity and security. In that, in most cases, you'll see in so many of these chains in the 21, 22 cycle, especially, which had hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars securing that network, and some meaningful fraction of that, maybe tens of millions if they're lucky, in TVL actually contributing and active on the chain. And Tarun has written about this in the past, and sort of more of a threat modeling perspective of what happens when lending rates are greater than staking rates within the blockchain. But we actually just thought to ourselves, why is there no world that exists where the liquidity that's actually helping to secure a chain can also contribute productively to activity on the chain, right? So why is there this lack of alignment per se between liquidity and security when these should ideally be a little bit more in lockstep, right? And stuff like LSTs has pushed us in the right direction. Stuff like eigenlayers pushed us in the right direction. I think the restaking as a concept is very philosophically aligned here. But I think our goal was, would it be possible to build an ecosystem from the ground up that allowed you to do two things? One, effectively turn liquidity into security. And two, use that productively and usefully for the applications building on the chain. Because I think another overwhelming trend that we saw, especially in with this class of applications, was no one really gave a shit what chain they're building on. They and a lot of mercenary builders were just we'll go to wherever the most hype is. We'll go to wherever they throw the most grants at us. We'll go wherever the puck maybe is right now and probably won't be in 3 months. And that didn't exactly feel like the right attitude to us either. So we were trying to think about ways in which the chain could actually drive value to the applications living on top of it. And I think that's sort of the second tenet of proof of liquidity, if you will, which is to say, to actually be able to drive value from the infrastructure layer or the chain itself into the application layer, right? So that applications have a real reason to exist and benefit from being on Berachain. And I think that what's happened along the way is, we've been able to, I think, spend a lot of time with the ecosystem, that app layer, and we've seen a really, I think, beautiful community emerge in that there's that sort of far left, far right curve symbiosis that I discussed a little bit earlier, in that we have people, cracking eggs on their heads and yelling yeet at the top of their lungs on one hand, but we also have people building what I think could be very much the, next generation of DeFi and sort of consumer-facing primitives in parallel. So I think that combination of both sides has been, what gives us the most joy and upside in these processes. Because I think, to say the quiet part out loud, very few people are in it for the tech at the moment, if that makes sense. I think if anything that we've seen over the last few days, whether that's, AI LLMs shitting out meme coins, or people, bull posting Solana while not giving a shit about the latest ZK, et cetera, right? I think that's becoming incredibly obvious to folks. But I do think what people are in it for are the applications that they actually get to use and interact with. And ideally the technology that underpins that in some useful manner as well, right? And I think that the success case we see for Berachain is where we can actually help build the ecosystem and lay the foundation for people to build that next generation of apps that they actually want to interact with and use, whether that is the spiciest new DeFi primitive or something as ridiculous but eye-catching as Puffpaw and VapeTurn, which maybe came across your feeds at some point in the past. So yeah, man, I hope that gives a little bit of the story. Basically, first there were a bunch of bears and dudes in some DeFi discords. Then there were more bears. Then we, raised a bunch of VC from some folks who are very, thankful to work with and have been incredibly supportive. And along the way, I think a lot of these sub-communities at the app layer have very much formed, and it's contributed to sort of what you would describe as this first cult chain ecosystem. And I think that we've tried to do that in the most authentic manner possible, in terms of never saying hey, we want you to go and engage in these posts and and comment and retweet to get this role in Discord, or get this privilege. It's been very much, how do we find ways to get people to continue engaging in things that they want to engage in, and preserve as much organic behavior as possible, because I think that most other approaches tend to fall off in a very short time frame. So, build shit that people want and have a good time doing it has been our approach to things.
Yeah, this is kind of. Sorry,
I was gonna say, I think I really agree with you on the apps comment that you made, because it's like, if you think about why people use Solana now, it's not really, at the beginning, maybe there's this narrative of like, oh, like it's faster and cheaper than ETH and stuff, but really everyone's just on fucking pumped up fun and trading meme coins and stuff, right? And the same thing for like ETH in 2021, people are just trading a bunch of NFTs. So I think at the end of the day, there are so many chains that basically do the same thing, and whether it's like faster than already super fast or cheaper than already super cheap doesn't really make a huge amount of difference to people. But whatever is like built there in terms of culture or dApps or whatever it is, I think is what ends up drawing people, and kind of what we've seen happen this cycle and also last cycle as well.
100%. Sorry, Mando, I thought you were going to say something before, so I didn't want to interrupt you if you did.
No, all I was going to say is that was like not what I expected from you. Like, if I'm honest, like you're sitting there wearing a bear suit,
yeah,
with bare bong NFTs, and then you speak really eloquently about like restaking and the app layer. I was just like, this is not what I expected, but it's cool to see. Like, I guess this is why people take this so seriously. It's I kind of I don't know what I expected, but this does feel like it's going to be very very well thought out, and kind of the antithesis of like the NFT themselves. So just touching on what OSF said, like what should we be looking out for? Like, if it's all about the apps and you clearly have the focus, right? Like, everyone saw the pictures from that Singapore event, right? That was part of the reason I wanted to get you on, because like you basically filled out a whole shopping mall, right? Like, everyone was trying to get into the Berachain event. And then I think people then got the scale of like what you've built from a cult standing. Like, what should we be looking out for when this launches?
Yeah, cheers, man. Appreciate it. And appreciate the earlier comments as well. I think that like I was recently trying to do a little bit of just like a retro on what has made things work to some extent to date, and also trying to keep our heads on very straight, right? It's still, early game. There's still so much that can go wrong. We have a lot to do, etc. And I think it's important not to get lost in that. But like a lot of it has been leaning into some degree of cognitive dissonance, right? In that people do not expect the bear smoking weed chain to have some degree of their shit together, or to be, very thorough and thoughtful about the ecosystem and ways that we can support that, or to, be thinking about how we can actually make sure that we're, I'd say evolving the metagame in different ways, right? So you were not the first to make that comment. I'm sure you won't be the last, and we'll do our best to continue dispelling things in the right way, I hope. Such that, people are going being like, this is fucked, and then come out being like, oh, this is actually pretty cool. Like, still kind of fucked, but cool in a good way. And to answer your second question about where things are heading, a couple big things on the horizon in my mind, man. One is a couple of processes that are underway at the moment. We put out this thing that we call RFB. It's a little bit derivative, or a little bit inspired by Layer Zero's RFP process, but we one of the other weird branding things, weird is maybe a conservative word here, but one of the branding things that the ecosystem has really taken on to is they'll just like add B's to the letter of like, to the first word of a lot of different things. So there'll be, instead of request for proposal, we ran with request for proposal. And then people seem to like that. And what we think about a lot there is like, there's been people building on our testnet for the better part of a year. There's been people who have been, actively building and attempting to, work on projects in the ecosystem and communicate, I'd say cultivate community sentiment for, north of a year and a half to 2 at this point. And we want to make sure that we can really help recognize and arm those rebels, if you will, as the chain goes live. So we think about that as part of our TGE process, and a lot of these different teams, there's over, I think, 400 applications that have been submitted between teams building on the testnet and community initiatives that we're hoping to be able to recognize in that process, so that when Bera TGEs, what we think about a lot is making sure that like those tokens are going to the right people. I think it's really easy to take a more laissez-faire approach to that, and just be like, yes, if you click this button on our testnet 10 times, you should get some tokens. And like, sure, there's stuff in the game for testnet users as well. But I really do believe that when you look at an airdrop and we look at TGE in general, the vast majority of that is not actually a user acquisition cost, as I think people often frame it as incorrectly. I think it's actually a sentiment acquisition cost to some extent. Like when you look at an airdrop, it's just like, okay, do I feel like this airdrop was fucked, or do I feel like this airdrop like was appropriate, right? And in our belief, it's, you know, rewarding people who helped us get here from a community development point of view, rewarding people who helped us get here from an application development point of view, rewarding liquidity that's going to live on the network and that's going to, you know, be there helping people transact on the chain over time, and helping people and rewarding people who help test the network as well, right? So that's going to be a pretty major initiative that's, you know, underway at the moment, and where we'll have more information in the next few weeks. That sort of ties into Boyko that we're doing in collaboration with the guys at Royco. Jay is an old friend and have known him since the good old days of Ferrari, et cetera. And I think that they're exceptionally gifted builders. And this is sort of our take on a liquidity bootstrapping program at the chain level, in which, you know, I'm sure you guys have seen sort of what happened with like with Blast and Manta, et cetera, where you have like this bridge contract, and you can what they did is they basically had like a, you know, the ability to just throw ETH or stables into a bridge. And people were sort of locked for a few months, but they're theoretically earning points, so they're earning some form of yield that they might be able to cash in at a later point. I can understand the value of this approach because, you know, it's useful for demonstrating lots of hype and, you know, potential value flowing into a chain. But I actually think it misses the point in terms of what actually needs to be achieved there. I don't care about a lot of funds being bridged onto Berachain. I care about a lot of funds going into Berachain's applications. You know, if there's funds sitting on the chain in a bunch of like, you know, cold wallets or LSTs that are unproductive, like whoop-de-doo, that hasn't accomplished anything for us. If there's funds that are being utilized in money markets, in, you know, DEXs, in sort of advanced derivatives protocols, in consumer applications, in games, whatever that might be, then that's a lot more interesting. So that's the.
Can I nail it in that a little bit? Like, so Blast did that, right? It really did try and get people to use the apps, and obviously had the whole gold stuff, which OSF knows well. What do you think went wrong there? Like, how are you going to do it differently?
Well, I have many thoughts there, and I try not to shit on people as a matter of practice. But
come on, I want to know. People want to know why this is going to be different to the last few times that they've been. This is all gone wrong.
Well, I think that if you build an ecosystem for mercenaries with a fuck ton of mercenary incentives and try to like put it in a pressure cooker for like, you know, 3 to 6 months and hope that something good comes out of it, then that's kind of retarded. And you're just, you know, like play stupid games and win stupid prizes, right? So great for a short-term play, and great at driving a lot of hype and initial excitement. And I would actually argue that there are 4 or 5 interesting applications that came out of the Blast ecosystem that weren't there that, you know, you didn't find on many other chains. So, you know, I think it's a respect where respect is due thing. But I also think that from what I understand in the past, their ecosystem support and accessibility of core team members really played a role in working against the ecosystem's growth. And I think they've tried to make changes for that going forward, and it seems to be trending in the right direction. But that initial event is also where a lot of that, you know, mind share and you know, that's where people look at the catalyst, right? And I think that the prep going into that was not ideal. On our side, I think we almost err on the opposite side of the spectrum in that people have been waiting for too long, and they're like Stockholm syndrome, and they got like a bunch of JPEGs of bears. And you know, I always get people being like, when mainnet, which is like fair. I don't blame them for asking us. And my
brother, half the questions that we're getting in the comments is when mainnet.
Oh, I see it. Ain't no fucking way I'm telling them, but like soon is a good answer. But you know, and they can probably see that with more of these things coming out, like RFA, RFB, etc. Like, you know, Boyko, like it's really not that far out, and we've never been this close before, so I'm pretty excited about it. And with that, right, like I think that our approach has been working with these teams for the better part of a year, like helping them in every single aspect that we can without infantilizing them, right? But like really, we do see the ecosystem team and the growth team, if you will, as an extension of our ecosystem's own applications, right? So it's our job to help them win, and we are, you know, I think we're very involved in that sense. And I think that's like drastically different from what I've seen in a lot of other ecosystems to date. And then finally, like I think what we've tried to really emphasize, like it's not about Berachain. Like, yes, we love Berachain. Berachain is what I think a lot of people get hype about, but I want them to be more hype about the applications there, and I want the spotlight to be on those apps. Because we don't win by being Berachain. We win by Berachain having a bunch of things that people want to use and you know, are as obsessed with as they are with any of their daily use products. So I think that those focuses end up being very different. And then finally, with like the incentive mechanisms, right? The whole idea of of proof of liquidity, to give it to you guys like in a nutshell, is that the block rewards that are effectively emitted by the chain as more blocks are produced and the validators do their thing are going into the applications themselves in the ecosystem. They're not just going to validators and stakers, they're being directed into the applications that are building on the chain, right? So it takes what is traditionally a somewhat value extractive process and makes it value additive for the people building with us.
Can you explain that a little bit? Can you?
Yeah, for sure.
So with the original ecosystem, obviously money goes to like the stakers or validators. How is it different here?
For sure. So in this case, what happens is you can think of it as a degree of like curvification on the chain layer, which is to say that Berachain uses Comet BFT. So with that, there's like not a massive validator set, but there's 100 and change, right? And each of these validators basically has a gauge. So you could think of this as like a voting gauge or effectively like a pie chart of distribution. So whenever that validator wins a block, they take a commission on that, and that's fine. And that helps cover their costs. That's part of their take home, etc. But then the majority of their block reward is actually distributed to applications within the ecosystem. So that means that if a validator, has a lot of delegates or a lot of people who are LPing a given pool on a DEX, or who are supplying in a given, a given pool on a money market, etc., that validator is actually helping to support the economic incentives going towards that application, right? So that opens up a couple of kind of cool degrees. On one hand, it just means that you can have an application running a validator at some point and helping to sort of bootstrap its own liquidity and get itself off the ground. On the other hand, if you have validators that perhaps also have liquid funds or their own balance sheet that they invest in, they can basically choose to deploy that capital in a given pool and then also help compound emissions towards it effectively by saying, hey, when I win a block, I'm going to push a bunch of my emissions towards this. And then finally, the part that I think is perhaps most interesting is it actually allows protocols and validators to collaborate to bootstrap their liquidity or price their own liquidity, in which a protocol can say, hey, I'm going to give you, $100 worth of my native tokens, right? I'm going to give you like Bera doge or whatever it is, right? And in exchange, I'm going to hope to get $110 worth of emissions or $90 worth of emissions, depending on the market scenario, right? To my pool on this DEX, or directly to incentivize users to use my application. And in my mind, that's where it gets very interesting, because instead of having like a somewhat toxic relationship or more MEV driven relationship that you sometimes have between validators and protocols on a classic proof of stake chain, you actually have them working together in service of the overall ecosystem growth, right? And then validators can take those incentives that they receive to protocols and then distribute it amongst their delegates. So that also means that delegates and basically people choosing to stake with different validators on Berachain can very much adjust their risk parameters. They can choose to delegate to a validator that's really low risk, and is effectively, helping to incentivize, let's say, stable pools or something super low risk that maybe they're already LPing in themselves, and just say, hey, I'm going to compound my own yields in the most conservative manner possible. Or they can choose to delegate to a validator that's helping to incentivize all sorts of like funky alts, right? And is receiving incentives from these alts in a basket of new tokens. And they can say, hey, I'm going to take like a portfolio of like mini venture bets in this, if you will. So we think that game theory gets really interesting. And we think that it also allows for a pretty solid like competitive marketplace with protocols looking to find ways to effectively price their own liquidity.
Okay, so validators basically, like you said, have a risk spectrum depending on what they are validating.
You've got it.
Or at least what protocols. Okay. All right. That's relatively interesting. And is anyone else doing similar sort of thing, or is this like I guess what you said, you're really leading with the apps, but this feels like something from a tech side that I haven't heard of before. Yeah,
and that's definitely part of the nuance of proof of liquidity. And I think that a lot of the time people focus on like the community or the cult or whatever you want to call it side on Berachain, and I think it's interesting because we get hooks both ways, right? And that a lot of people will be interested because of that at a high level. And then they might dive in a little bit more and be like, oh, this proof of liquidity kit thing is kind of cool. And sometimes it goes the other way. But I'd say right now it's like 80-20 people are hooked on the community and then learn about the tech. I'm looking to find ways to, I wouldn't say equalize, but help find more opportunities for people to get excited about, the tech stack in the first place. And then, be even more enamored by the community, if you will. So to answer your question, Mando, it is a novel implementation. I'd say the systems that it is probably most like that people can recognize most similarly will probably be what one thinks about with like some of the curve and convex systems on mainnet. But this has never really been implemented or conceived of at the chain validator level, if you will.
And what's the plan for the NFTs you guys have post TG and how that could kind of like fit into the ecosystem, etc.?
I wish I could say more there, but
pushing buttons there.
No, you're good. You're good. It's a reasonable question. It's one I can't answer, but like they're good. They're good JPEGs. I'm a big fan of the NFTs.
How many collections are there now? Because I remember whenever they traded a lot, right? Like I think the other day, like over 100 Ether volume in a day. Like
I woke up one morning and there was a tweet from OpenSea that was like Bera's in control. I'm like, what the fuck is going on here?
Tweet from
and then people were like,
your NFTs are sold.
Yeah, and everyone was like, oh, like has a snapshot been taken? And I'm like, no, like bro, we haven't even finalized shit internally. I don't know what's happening with these things. So no, I think that I think that they've definitely done a ton of volume, and they've often been like at the forefront of many different NFT primitives as well. So like they were like one of the top volume collections on SudoSwap. There's even a bunch of NFTs within the ecosystem. Like that ecosystem projects have like minted on Arbitrum or on mainnet for shits and giggles that have ended up doing quite well. But last I checked, like there's a Dune dashboard that some community members spun up. I think they've done like $75 million in volume or something. And like, to be clear, we've never advertised or, we've never like done anything to help promote them in that sense. So sometimes people look at them and they're like, oh, people wash trading these NFTs of bears. I'm like, bro, no, they're just speculating on shit.
And so I like that. I like having a backbone of an NFT community. I still think NFTs are the best community building tool out there. Like I think they even better than meme coins.
Completely agree.
But what else? Like, what do you think a successful chain needs to have to be successful now? Like you said, apps. And like everyone has apps. A perp dex, everyone has a dex, but like what is success for you in terms of the apps after a year?
Yeah, good question, man. I think there's probably 2 or 3 different things that can cause an app to be useful in my mind. On one hand, it can be very much like a foundational base plate that ends up being a great building block or yield primitive for a lot of other people to build around. So, GMX on Arbitrum might be a sort of a good proxy to think about here, right? In our ecosystem, that might be a project called Infrared, which is sort of an LST mix of like Lido plus Convex, if you will, that'll allow people to do a whole bunch with the staking token of the network, and has 100+ groups building around it already, backed by Binance Labs, etc. A bunch of super sharp builders from the space we've known for a long time. On the other hand, we think about applications that can very much just absolutely print users, right? And I mean that not in a botted manner, but in like something that people will end up using a lot, will ideally generate lots of fees, and will help be an onboarding point for the ecosystem. I think Puffpaw is one that makes tons of sense there, and it's a pretty fucking cool model of stop smoking / vape to earn. And these guys definitely saw a fair bit of notoriety as they came out of like stealth mode like a few weeks back. And I remember half the time I was like, everyone was like, I hate this or I love this. And having met the team and knowing that they have like incredibly legitimate backgrounds and basically shipping tens of millions of vapes for some of the largest companies in the world, I was like, I think there's a bet that very much should be taken here. There's something to be said about the Telegram ecosystem as well. Like there are games on the Berachain testnet that are making 20 to 30K a day in Telegram microtransaction fees, which is insane to me, and have a million plus users. Now, do I believe that those are all entirely real? No, but do I think that that's nonetheless like pretty cool to see? Yeah, for sure. And then I think there's lots of things that end up just being like fee printers. And I think that, Pump Fun is probably the best colloquial example of this. But there's one in the Berachain ecosystem. There's many in the Berachain ecosystem, but there's one that I'm incredibly excited about called Exponents. It's built by an old friend named Brian. He's been in the space since 2018, 2019. Was actually part of the company that was acquired into Terra to form Anchor back in the day. So he's definitely seen some shit and, has got his battle scars, if you will, but has built an Oracle-free power perp / linear perps protocol that allows you to effectively, it allows you to, of course, go long or short on any given altcoin / meme coin, which I think is nice in itself. But what is more interesting here is they've actually added an incentive layer to the mix as well. Which is to say that, normally when you're LPing in a perp dex or something like that, right, you're able to go long or short, and you're effectively earning fees as the house and maybe funding rates, right, depending on which way the trade's going. Exponents actually allows you for the first time to like financialize the tribalism of on-chain cults, if you will, and say, okay, there's this, bonk with pair. I'm going to bribe someone, or I'm going to incentivize someone with $100 to go long on whiff and short bonk, or vice versa. And that incentive in turn could actually cause a chart to move in a pretty meaningful direction and reverse momentum. So I think it adds a new dimension to trading that could also be incredibly lucrative from a fee generation point of view. So I think stuff like that is really cool. I think the ecosystem has, in my mind, like a pretty gnarly mix of new DeFi primitives and then fun new stuff on the user-facing side. So when you think about that user-facing side, right? For example, there's an L2 that's building with us, so Berachain is EVM identical, so it's about as close as you can get to the Ethereum, layer 1 as possible, which means that you can actually also deploy layer 2s to Berachain quite easily. So there's one that is actually building with us that will be a clearinghouse chain for effectively all of Visa's Web3 transactions that I think will be pretty gnarly and already has 20,000-ish users from just sort of like early prototype type stuff. There's also a group that will be tokenizing horse stables and putting them on chain, which sounds ridiculous at first, but is one of those things I think is at the intersection of like useful and hilarious, because I think the real alpha is in tokenizing horse breeding rights. And they can do that too, because you can get like a Triple Crown Derby winning, like Kentucky Derby winning horse for like 500K to 750K, and then breed that motherfucker 200 times a year for between 10 and 25K a pop. So if you're telling me that people will, be able to get 400 to 500% APY on, horse breeding on chain, I think that's hilarious and very like spiritually correct for the Berachain ecosystem. and then I guess one of the other ones I think is really cool on the DeFi side is like credit default swaps on chain that has never been done before, and I think will be incredibly interesting. And probably a bunch of other stuff that's just not coming to mind right off the top. But I hope that sort of like gives you a little bit of a sense of like, what that spectrum could look like. Like, yes, there's a bunch of apps, but there's also just a bunch of cool, people building interesting projects that I think are very much representative of those applications and the overall culture.
I had a question for you. We spoke a little bit earlier about like, and I think you just touched on quite deeply now on different stuff that can get people over from a cultural standpoint. I know like meme coins have been a massive thing this year. And it seems to me like some chains have kind of deliberately pushed that to try and gain users, whether it's Tron doing what they have done in the last few weeks, or Avalanche even creating like a ecosystem fund. Do you guys have any plans to like try and push the whole meme coin thing, or is it just like a let's see what happens and whatever will be sort of vibe?
Yeah, no, I think trying to push meme coins is really stupid, to be honest. In that, like, I think that meme coins either happen or they don't. Either you attract the type of crowd, or you attract like the meme coin cabal per se, which ends up being like relatively concentrated, right? And you find people who want to hop on those trends, and you have the right trading experience, or you don't. I think that like throwing money at it, or trying to overly home cook it, just ends up with a highly inauthentic experience. So then ends up feeling more like a VC inside trade than a meme coin, and that freeing aspect of it, if you will, right? What I would say though is I think we'll have a lot of infrastructure for doing cool shit with meme coins. So for example, that project, like I mentioned, Exponents, imagine being able to basically bribe someone to go long or short on like a 600, 700K market cap token, right? If someone's getting paid $500 to go long, that could very much change the chart dynamics quite meaningfully, right? So I think there will be meme coin adjacency. And I think that there's, for example, another team that's actually building kind of like, I would say the opposite or a complementary product there called Squeeze It, and that actually allows you to short meme coins. So I think that like both of those are things that will make the meme coin trading experience, for example, better on Berachain. But I don't think that we're going to be like yelling it from the rooftops about how people need to launch meme coins. I'm quite sure that it will happen by nature, though.
There is going to be a disturbing amount of bear themed coins.
Oh my god, it's going to be fucked.
Like I'm just trying to think of all the different bears that are going to be on the top of the Berachain thing. Like Blast, what did Blast have? It had
Pac-Man. I remember Pac-Man.
It was all around like Pac-Man, but there was some other like Blaster stuff that they tried to get. But Berachain, man, like there is just going to be a disturbing amount.
And dude, that's the other thing, right? Like this is perhaps the funniest part. I think that people have called us a meme chain in the past, and I think that's both correct and incorrect. I would also argue that like that's a bit of a Trojan horse, in that I think that there are many, many, many more people today that know what Doge is, or know what, you know, Pepe is, or know what Sheeb is, than know about the existence of Sui or Aptos or Avax, or, you know what I mean? Like any people, us included, right? And I don't mean that to take shots at those teams. I mean that more in that like people understand meme coins to some degree of intuitiveness. They also understand animal coins. So as much as like, you know, we're not trying to be like, oh, we're a meme chain, it's not a bad backup narrative to have, or it's not a bad thing to have in our back pocket by any means, because that's just another shot at distribution. And Mando, when you were asking earlier about like what chains need, right? Like, you know, applications. But I also think that like the biggest thing that even chains with decent apps lack nowadays is effective distribution channels to actually get people onto those fucking applications. And, you know, ideally this works out in a good B2B2C sense, where it's like, hey, the chain helps support lots of good applications. It's like, you know, the App Store, the Microsoft Office suite, and then those in turn bring lots and lots of users. But at the same time, you can't guarantee that, right? So, you know, that comes down to those apps, but it also comes down to the chain to find all sorts of different ways to actually make people care about the apps building on top of it. And I think that's where we'll also be spending a lot of time and effort going forward.
And what do you think of, because I've seen, even in the last few days, slightly different topic, but Scroll has gotten a lot of flack for going with one of these centralized exchanges. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the Launchpad coins, I think there's only like one or two of them up this year. And I remember at the start of this conversation, you said like it's going to be more, you know, it's going to be more evenly distributed, or you spoke up your tokenomics, or you spoke up your distribution. Yeah, what's your plan around that? Like how again do you think this is going to do better from a distribution / tokenomic standpoint than some of these others that they've just seemingly failed on that too?
Yeah, I think the problem is like that's very much a catch-22, like damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of situation, right? Because on one hand, if you don't end up actually getting listings on major centralized exchanges, then, you know, there's minimal liquidity for your token. There, you know, price generally is lower, all that kind of stuff, right? And that's still by far the venue in which the majority of people in the world will go and trade, right? So definitely not good in that sense. On the other hand, you know, if you don't pay the piper in some cases, then you just sort of end up playing yourself, right? Or if you only distribute on chain, etc. So for us, I think we're actually too early to say for sure. You know, I think we're going to do our best to make sure that our distribution's as fair as possible. And I think what I would emphasize is about like the targeting of the distribution, right? Like I think that rewarding people because, you know, they've engaged, like I don't think it makes sense for us to be like, yes, let's reward people who like used Arbitrum, right? Or like, you know, use the X or Y testnet once or something that isn't related to us. I think it's actually like really important to find, you know, niches or subcategories or what I would call like validated leads, where you can tell that someone has expressed a degree of interest beyond the norm in the ecosystem, and then find ways to target token distribution towards them, as opposed to just kind of like scattershotting it and being like, yeah, we're going to like, you know, throw them in a bunch of different directions and like hopefully one of these 500 million wallets catches it and actually wants to run with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree with that. Like you check an airdrop checker and I just don't even, I've never been looking at any of these things. I just, sometimes I get given coins, which I just instantly sell. So I do think there needs to be somewhere in between. It's difficult though, right? Because you have all the Sybil attacks and, like where if you just make it on the chain, then sometimes you just end up with like tons of bots on the chain. Like I think 100%. People are trying to kind of actually capture real people in crypto, which is like almost impossible to do.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And yeah, I think that's where, you know, I think part of the gift and the curse of you know, where we're at is on one hand, there's lots of high expectations and there's people who, you know, I think are very excited about what's coming next. On the other hand, I can also, you know, perhaps state that with communities having been formed for this long, with, you know, I guess a better part of a year and a half of just like a ton of growth initiatives. And I'd say with, you know, well over 200 teams that I know of building in the ecosystem and, you know, close to 100 million plus of like venture capital that's been injected in there. I do think that it's fair to say that there's people who like, you know, have put in the effort and time and care about what's being built there. So I'm hoping that they're a little bit more anti-fragile than other groups that we've seen in the past as, you know, as tokens go live. But, you know, never know till you know, right? So I try to keep a, you know, an optimistic but conservative mindset on these things.
And just to nail in, because I think you're one of the major projects coming. I think you yourself, Monad, Mega ETH are the three that people always mention from a chain perspective. What I know you don't want to shit on anyone else, but what do you think is really going to set you apart from these two? Is it from a tech, or is it you think it's going to be the culture standpoint? Like, these are the three that everyone's looking at, and it feels as though no one knows who's going to be first. No one knows, like how this is going to play out. But
yeah, for sure.
Why do you think you're gonna crush those two?
I think that they're both respectable competitors, so I'll start with that. And I've share the stage of those guys a ton of times. And there's definitely some applications that are like building between the ecosystems. I think there's especially like a few that are between us and Monad. I think that the way I put it is that they both have a pretty strong focus on parallelization, which is I think great from a UX point of view. But I also think that there is very little that those chains can do at a base layer to actually help drive value into their applications. And I think that in itself and sort of that validator protocol interaction that I mentioned with proof liquidity is massive. And I also, I would also sort of bet on the community that is formed and the app ecosystem that is formed in Berachain above just about any of those other ecosystems to date. I think that I've actually I'm a small angel on Mega ETH, for example. I consider Shuyao a good friend. I spoke with her and Namik a bunch when they were getting off the ground about the Mega Mafia, which is sort of like their builders program that's I think loosely derivative or inspired by what we built with Build the Bera, which is like an in-house incubator that's very much meant to help top tier teams get off the ground and set the bar for talent really high in the ecosystem. I think that I've seen promising stuff coming out of their application layer ecosystem before. I haven't spent as much time in the Monad ecosystem myself. I've seen a couple of good teams, and it sounds like there's like definitely like community there. But what I guess I haven't seen as of yet, and what I think is a major indicator of success, is the emergence of like subcults or subcultures within a larger ecosystem. Like I think there's a point at which something goes from like a thing to a movement, if that makes sense. And I think that that's the point that we're starting to see within the Berachain ecosystem, as in there are enough things happening in parallel, and there's enough ideas ricocheting off each other and constructive interference between individual groups that we're starting to see these their own pillars form within the ecosystem. And I think that like a parallel that you could kind of look at this with was like way back in the day, like with Chainlink, right? I think that part of what made Chainlink work is that the community growth, or apart from Chainlink God, was very tough to necessarily distinguish like who was the nexus of all that activity. There were like 7 to 10 like figureheads at any given point in time, and I think that we're starting to see that, but on a much larger and deeper level, in that there's these mini cults emerging within the larger organism, and I think that is like the sign of breakout velocity. So I think between that and the application layer that I've seen, and the fact that proof of liquidity really is meant to help applications more than anything else, I think that it is a tough combination to beat. And I think that I also have a team that I would bet on to no end. But I have to be biased in that equation, and I can also recognize that, because if I thought we were going to lose, then I'd be pretty stupid, wouldn't I be?
Yeah, no, I'm definitely interested in this now. Like, I think I thought before this it was a bit more niche, it was going to be more NFT centric, but this feels more DeFi centric, if anything, from the sounds of it. And then you kind of have, I think, because you have all the NFTs, you probably have the base for the meme coins pretty quickly, and you have the base for more NFTs, I guess, more culture, which is kind of a bit more. I mean, you can't really meme Mega ETH, I feel like, whereas a bear is quite easy to do. So I feel like
bear does lead itself to it.
you're gonna have quite a lot of people come in there, and maybe this is, well, it's not cheeky, but like, how much longer do you think we have of this bull cycle, and how are you thinking about that from a TGE standpoint?
That's a good question, man. I'm the farthest thing from a macro wizard, to be honest. And I don't even know if I'd say that we're in a bull cycle right now. It feels like we're in a weird 2020-esque chop. But I also do feel like there's enough things happening at the global macro/policy scale that feel correct in terms of setting up for a good run forwards. And I think that coins go up, coins go down. We launch when we're the most ready from a tech point of view, and then from a robustness point of view. For us, we're hoping for pretty soon, and we basically are not trying to we're not trying to time the TG with the market, if that makes sense. We're trying to time TG with internal confidence on everything else. So I think that we've still got a few months left in a pretty solid bull run. As in, like, I would be surprised if we were in a worse place in like Q3, Q4 next year. But you know, I'm the farthest thing from a macro guy, like I said. But it does seem like things are setting up well.
Yeah, I agree with you. This hasn't really felt like a classic bull cycle to me.
No,
it's
kind
felt
of
like
wonky.
Bitcoin dominance is about to go to like 60% right now, and we've had meme coins come back, but even all, like as I said, all the Binance Launchpad coins have not really done that well. That's not really a bull market, really, is it? It's
of course,
it feels more like 2020.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, look, I think that's what we do. We've done an hour now, Smokey. But thank you so much for coming on. I know you obviously had to protect yourself slightly. Oh god, my internet's screwing up. You had to protect yourself slightly with what you could say, but I've definitely got more interested. Feels like vape to earn is the thing to take away from this, and a ton of different bear meme coins, NFTs, and some of the stuff around proof of liquidity sounds like it could be pretty unique. So, yeah, super interested. OSF, do you maybe want to? I think you have the drank stuff that you want to mention.
I don't think we have a drank code this week, actually. So.
Oh my god, that's multiple weeks in a row that you.
No, we had it last week.
Oh really?
Actually, we do have a code. We do have a code. I'm sorry, we do have a code. The code is soon. SOON. The code is soon. In honor of Smokey the Bera, the code is soon.
I would have bet that was Bera. I mean, I bet people were trying to get that one beforehand, but soon it is. All right. Well, look, maybe we'll have you off the TGE, Smokey. We definitely covered Blast a lot when that was on the come up and then the come down as well. It would be great to see that this continues and you go from strength to strength in a year's time. But yeah, I'll have you back on. That'd be great.
Fingers crossed, man. Down anytime. And if you guys loved vape turn, you're gonna love hearing about jerk turn in the future. That one is the next one that I think we'll set the timeline.
I think CT will do pretty well on that one.
Yeah, that will do great. All right. Well, this has been Rekt Radio. Obviously, go check out our sponsor, dYdX. Like we just said, they've launched a Trump and obviously Kamala prediction market. You can go check it out. We have our own unique code there, which is being shown on screen, and it will have a unique code on the tweets as well. Thank you, dYdX, for sponsoring it, and thank you, Smokey, for coming on. Really appreciate it. We will see you guys next week.
Of course. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.